when did y'all get here? Oh, yeah, you're right. I told y'all to come for the read aloud. Okay, hold on. I've been here so long, it's just me. Just disregard this.
Every day, I go to school. I meet my friends. And we all say, hello, how are you? I'm good.
Chapter 11! Other things happen in an exciting manner. Boo-boo. You will remember that earlier I said the Templeton twins' hobbies would prove to be extremely important later in the story. If you don't remember me saying that, I urge you to turn back to Chapter 2, the first Chapter 2, and refresh your memory, because I distinctly remember saying it and I remember you reading it. And now is when the twins' hobbies will prove to be very important, so pay close attention, because I almost hear you thinking, how can doing crossword puzzles or playing the drums possibly help the twins get out of the dean's horrible basement? And now I'm going to tell you why. After Abigail delivered to her brother the rather upsetting observation that Dean probably wanted to kill them, John said, "We have to escape. Maybe we can break our way out of here." He looked around until he saw an old folded-up ladder lying on the floor. He dragged it over to one of the windows, opened it up, and braced it against the wall. Yes, this kicked up a lot of dust and dirt and was extremely unpleasant. But what do you expect? He worked his way up the ladder and to the window and examined it. Then he said, "Oh, nuts," and climbed back down. He went over to his sister and said, "The windows have bars across them on the outside." Abigail looked around the dank, dirty basement and up the wobbly stairs to the locked door and said, "So we can't escape." "Thanks a lot," John said, in what I'm sure we all can agree is a sarcastic tone of voice. Abigail shook her head. "I don't mean let's give up. I just mean that we can't escape in that escapey way of breaking out of here." Abigail, of course, knew better than almost anyone that words you use to think about something can determine how much success you have in dealing with it. "If we think about escaping, we'll never get anywhere because we can't do it ourselves. So let's not think about escaping." "Then what should we think about?" John protested. "Let's think about leaving," Abigail said. "What we need to think about is how we can leave." John said, "Oh." He thought for a second. "Well, we can leave if someone lets us leave." "Okay, so who can let us leave?" John said, "There's one person, Dandy Dean." "Right! And what do we need him to do?" John shrugged. "Open the door and get out of the way." "So how do we get him to do that?" And they discussed it. Getting Dandy Dean to open the basement door didn't seem too difficult. On the other hand, convincing him to get out of the way seemed like a hard problem to solve. John said, "We can't just ask him to get out of the way because he'll say no." Then Abigail said, "It would work if we could just keep him from being in the way." John nodded. He looked around the dirty, cluttered, dank basement. "Suppose we get Dandy Dean to open the door and come down here," he said. "What would surprise him? What's the last thing you'd expect to see when you come into a room?" Abigail thought for a second. Then she smiled. She told John her idea, and he said, "Yes!" And then he got busy. Now, one thing you learn about when you play the drums is equipment. Why? Because a set of drums consists of a lot of things that have to be mounted and hooked up to one another. If you take the set to play a party or a concert, you have to take it all apart and then mount and hook up everything again. And then take it all apart and bring it home and then put it all together again. It's the only instrument I know of that you have to rebuild every time you move it. Thus, when you play the drums, you learn about a lot of stuff. You learn about the drum heads made of plastic and the hoops and the wooden shells and the metal lugs and nuts and the bolts and stands and keys and clamps. You learn about little pads made of felt and little pieces of plastic tubing. You learn about springs and foot plates and tension rods. You get a lot of experience in attaching and clamping and tightening and loosening and things like that. So, John surveyed the basement to see what kind of equipment the twins had at their disposal. As I have already taken the trouble to inform you, there was a great deal of things. The question was, how could they use it to achieve their goal? John said that they could maybe do this or that or some other thing. Then John suggested a certain idea, and Abigail said it was perfect. At which point, of course, John said, and you may say it with me now, let's do it and review it. Let's do that again. Let's do it and review it. Yes, all of this is very exciting. However, it is my duty to inform you that as they enacted their plan, they got their clothes dirty. They got grime and dust and cobwebs and various kinds of icky things on their formerly clean clothes. I know this upsets you as much as it upsets me, but we all just have to learn to live with it. The first thing they did was to look around the dirty basement for just the right kind of mirror, and they found it. The mirror was tall and narrow, of the kind that you hang on a closet door so you can see your entire body when you're trying on clothes to go to a ball or a show or a dance or a prom or whatever people like to do when they get all dressed up. It was, of course, dirty and scratched and not very attractive for the use in the bedroom, but it would do. Next, they looked around for and found some thin rope. Then they needed something that would hang on the rope without falling off. And they found it when they discovered an ancient toolbox that contained a bunch of S hooks. These are hooks in the form of the letter S, which, as you are no doubt aware of, is shaped like this, an S. They hunted among old lamps until they found one that still worked. Then John climbed up the ladder, wrapped an old cloth around his hand, and used it to unscrew one of the hot bulbs shining in the ceiling light socket. That's the mirror, and the S-hooks, the rope, the light bulb, and the lamp. Then came the hard part. They moved the ladder to a particular place. They tied the ends of the thin rope together, forming a big loop. Then John climbed up the ladder and hung the big loop of rope over a pipe running across the ceiling. It was like draping a rubber band over a pencil. They ended up with 2 smile-shaped loops of rope hanging down the pipe, which hung above the lowest step on the stairway. I wrote this in italics because it is important. You'll see why if you keep reading, which of course you will. Then they brought the 2 hanging smile-shaped loops of rope together and hung 2 S-hooks from the ropes. And then, holding their breath in suspense, they hung the mirror. They did this by jamming the free ends of the 2 S-hooks underneath the top of the mirror's frame at the back so that the whole mirror dangled freely off the hooks. You may be thinking, hey, hanging the mirror off those S-hooks is sort of like when they hung the dog's picture off the fish hooks. And I would tip my hat to you if you thought that. And if I actually wore a hat, and if you actually thought it. Did you think it? The mirror was now hanging off the rope, hovering over the last step of the stairway. The mirror's frame didn't break because the mirror was pretty light. Then they put the bulb that John had removed from its socket into the old lamp they had chosen and found an outlet on the ceiling and plugged it in. Yes, there were outlets on the ceiling. Old basements have all these all the time, so you will simply have to accept it. The outlet worked. The lamp worked. So they tied some rope to the lamp and hung that from another pipe on the ceiling. I know you are exhausted from following this description of what the Templeton twins did, and I am too. But it will all pay off soon, so please continue reading as I continue writing. Do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. The twins now had the mirror hanging straight down at the foot of the steps and the lighted lamp hanging farther up the steps. John looked around until he found a solid piece of lumber that wasn't too long or heavy. He picked up Cassie's leash and wrapped its loop around his hand a couple times so that he had a good tight hold. So he had it good and tight. Abigail dug a hammer out of the old toolbox. She walked up the steps and, as she expected, found the light switch for the entire basement near the door. She turned off the lights. Luckily, it was daytime, so even though the basement was fairly gloomy and dark, enough light came from the windows that she could come partially back down the steps without difficulty. They were ready. Abigail said, "Okay, let's do it." Then, as loudly as she could, she started yelling, "Ow! Ow! 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 It hurts! Ow! Ow!" And John started yelling, "Help! Help! Dan! Abigail is hurt! Help!" It didn't take long for the twins to hear hasty pounding footsteps in the kitchen above. The basement door swung open, and Dandidine appeared at the top of the steps. It was then that the following exciting things happened in this order. 1. Dandidine squinted into the basement and noticed the lights were out. He turned them on with the switch at the top of the stairs. 2. When the lights came on, the lamp that the Templeton twins had hung shined right in his face. 2A. Cassie, the ridiculous dog, barked ridiculously. Bark, 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 bark. That was 2A. Real 3. Dandidine took a step or two down the stairs and saw something so startling and disturbed him that he yelled, "Ah!" 4. At that moment, Abigail availed herself of the opportunity to smash him in the foot with the hammer. Yow! Ah! 5. He stumbled down the steps, crashed into the hanging mirror. 5A. Cassie, the ridiculous dog, barked in the mirror. 6. John elected at that moment to whack Dandidine across the legs with a piece of lumber. Ah! 7. Dandidine fell forward, grabbing the mirror for support. The mirror came off the S-hooks and, it goes almost without saying, went crashing onto the floor along with Dandidine. 8A. Cassie barked uselessly and ridiculously. Barkity bark bark bark, barkity bark bark bark, barkity bark bark bark. 9. The Templeton twins, John dragging Cassie, ran up the steps into the kitchen, shut the basement door, and locked it. And 10, they ran outside. Cassie looked around in the sunshine at the trees and the tired old lawn furniture and the general array of the yard junk, and her mouth open and her pink tongue gently bobbing up and down as she panted with excitement, then looked up and down at the twins with bright eyes, and her expression said, "Woo! That was fun. This is great. What's next? Bark, bark, bark." No, wait. First, when they were running through the kitchen, Abigail's eyes fell on that drawing of the balloon mounted on the refrigerator. By that, I do not mean that her eyeballs literally dropped out of her head onto the drawing. I mean the picture caught her attention. Then they ran outside. The picture caught her attention. That's important. And that's when things got really, really tricky. Questions for review. What is the difference between escaping and leaving? Write your answer in the form of a poem here. Question number 2. What is the difference between ha and ya? Be specific. Question number 3. What is the difference between being hit in the foot with a hammer or being whacked in the legs with a piece of wood? Draw a beautiful picture illustrating your answer. So I started reading. Boop. Those were the steps. That's why I was reading all crazy. And then, oh wait, I want y'all to see Cassie, for those of you who don't have your book, when she was barking. Barkity bark, bark, bark. And then 10. And then those are the questions for review. All right, I will see you guys next time as we read chapter 12 of the Templeton Twins Have an Idea. Bye, guys.
This video is brought to you by LWE. Liquid
Elementary. Learning for you and me. Yeah.